When people looked at me, they saw a woman who had everything: the mansion on the hill, the diamonds on my wrist, the husband with a name that carried weight in every room. To the world, I was Jean Cross, the woman who had it all. But they didn't see the truth behind the smile. They didn't see how lonely it feels to live in a cage made of gold. Every morning started the same. The staff would greet me with polite smiles while my husband, Charles, sat at the breakfast table reading financial reports. He barely looked up when I entered. If he did, it was only to correct me. The way I poured his coffee, the way I spoke, the way I existed. He often said things like, "Jean, you wouldn't last a week without me." His voice carried the calm confidence of a man who truly believed it. And for years, I believed it too. He had the money, the power, the empire. I was simply the wife who looked the part. At dinners, he spoke for both of us. At parties, I was a prop in his perfect life. He introduced me as his beautiful wife, and I smiled because that was my role. Smile, stay quiet, be perfect. But perfection is heavy when it's built on someone else's control. One night, we hosted another one of his grand gatherings. The chandeliers glittered, the wine flowed, and the guests whispered about business and power. I stood by his side in my silver gown, smiling on cue. Then I heard him. Charles was laughing with a few men by the piano. One of them said, "You're lucky, Charles, a beautiful wife and no drama." Charles replied, loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's not made for work, she's made to stay pretty. Trust me, Jean couldn't survive without me for a week." Laughter followed. My heart sank, but I didn't move. My smile didn't break. The humiliation burned through me quietly like fire behind glass. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A quiet voice rose, trembling but strong, whispering, "Then prove him wrong." When the last guest left, and Charles went upstairs without a word, I stayed behind in the kitchen. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock. I stared at my reflection in the window and finally asked myself a question I had never dared to before. Who am I when I'm not his wife? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being invisible. That night, something inside me came alive. Not anger, not revenge, just truth. The kind of truth that wakes you up and refuses to let you sleep. Charles had spent years reminding me that I couldn't live without him. What he didn't know was that he had just given me the reason to start living for myself. The morning after the party, the house looked spotless, but my heart was in ruins. I moved through the rooms like a stranger in my own life. The maids polished the marble floors, the gardener trimmed the roses, and Charles left for work without a word. It was as if nothing had happened, but for me, everything had changed. His words from the night before kept echoing in my mind like a curse. "She's not built for work. She's built to stay pretty." I could still hear the laughter that followed, the sound of people agreeing that I was nothing more than decoration. I used to think silence kept the peace. But now I understood that silence had only protected his comfort, not my worth. That morning, I looked at the woman in the mirror. Perfect hair, perfect dress, lifeless eyes. I didn't recognize her anymore. I wanted to scream, but the sound refused to come out. Instead, I made a decision that felt small at first but changed everything. I took off the diamond necklace Charles had bought me for our anniversary and placed it in the jewelry box. For years, I had worn it like a badge of belonging, but now it felt like a chain. That day, I left the house without telling anyone. No driver, no schedule, no makeup artist, just me. I walked through the city streets alone for the first time in years. People brushed past me, too busy to care who I was, and it felt liberating. For once, I was invisible by choice. I wandered into a small cafe near the art district. It was quiet, filled with people who looked alive in ways I had forgotten. A woman sat at a corner table with a laptop and a cup of black coffee, typing furiously, her face lit with purpose. I envied her freedom. I didn't know what she was writing, but I wanted to feel what she was feeling, that quiet power of creating something of her own. When I returned home that evening, Charles was waiting. He looked up from his armchair, irritated. "Where were you?" he asked. "Out," I replied. "Out where?" "Just out." He frowned. "You're being childish, Jean. You have responsibilities here. If you want to wander around, hire security next time." His words weren't angry, just dismissive, as if I were a spoiled child who had broken a rule. That was his way of reminding me who held the leash. That night, he fell asleep quickly, but I stayed awake. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how many years I had spent living according to his plan. Every decision, every step, every breath, all designed to keep his world flawless. But mine was falling apart quietly beneath it. I remembered the woman from the cafe, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, the way her eyes shone with self-belief. I wanted that feeling. I didn't know how, but I wanted to create something that was mine. By morning, I made another decision. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was mine. I was going to find out what I was capable of. That was the first day I started taking back my power, quietly, piece by piece, because every empire begins with a single act of defiance. The next few weeks became my turning point. Though no one noticed it. I didn't storm out or argue. I didn't announce that I was changing my life. I simply began to wake up earlier than usual. Before the house filled with footsteps and orders, I would sit by the window with a notebook and a cup of coffee. It was the first time in years that my thoughts had room to breathe. I started writing about everything I felt, the loneliness, the anger, the years of silence. At first, it was messy, just scattered emotions on paper. But soon, those words began forming patterns. I didn't realize it then, but I was rebuilding my voice, one sentence at a time. Charles noticed the changes, of course. "What are you doing up so early?" he asked one morning, standing in the doorway of my little study. "Just writing," I said. He chuckled softly, the same patronizing tone I had heard 1,000 times. "You're not a writer, Jean. Don't waste your time on silly hobbies." I smiled. But this time, it wasn't out of obedience. "Maybe I just want to see what I'm capable of." He didn't like that answer. I could tell from the way his jaw tightened before he left the room. For the first time, I realized that his control depended on my compliance. The moment I started questioning him, his confidence began to crack. During the day, while he was at work, I took small steps toward independence. I visited bookstores, attended small business talks, and started reading about entrepreneurship. I discovered women who had built their own companies, women who had faced worse and still risen higher. Each story planted a seed inside me, proof that I could grow something of my own. At night, I studied quietly, business strategies, online markets, product branding. It felt like I was learning to breathe again. Every new skill, every bit of knowledge, was a piece of armor. One evening, Charles came home early. He found me at the dining table, with my laptop open, and a stack of notes spread across the surface. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I'm learning about startups," I replied calmly. He laughed. "You don't need to work, Jean. That's what I'm here for. Why exhaust yourself pretending to be something you're not?" I closed the laptop gently and looked him in the eye. "Maybe I'm not pretending. Maybe I'm finally trying to remember who I am." He didn't reply. He just shook his head and walked away, muttering something about women being emotional creatures. But that night, I didn't cry. I didn't shrink. I felt stronger than ever. Because I finally understood what real strength was. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't fighting. It was quiet persistence. The kind that grows stronger every time someone tries to break it. The next morning, I walked into the same cafe where I had seen that woman typing weeks ago. I sat at the same table, ordered the same black coffee, and opened my notebook. This time, I wasn't writing about pain. I was writing about possibility. That was the day I stopped waiting for permission to exist. I used to think freedom had to be loud, that it needed an audience, a declaration, or a dramatic exit. But real freedom begins in silence. Mine began the day I decided to invest in myself. I had been saving quietly for months, small amounts from household allowances, gifts, and little bits of forgotten money tucked away over the years. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Every dollar represented a tiny act of rebellion. I opened a small business account under my name, Jean Cross, for the first time since my marriage. My hands trembled as I signed the papers, not out of fear, but out of disbelief that I was finally claiming a piece of my own life. At home, Charles didn't notice. He was too busy expanding his empire, meeting investors, and attending charity galas, where he loved to be admired. I stayed out of his way, just as he preferred. But this time, it was on my terms. During those quiet hours, I began sketching out a business idea. I wanted to create something that reflected me, not luxury, not status, but authenticity. I remembered how difficult it had been to find clothes that made me feel like myself, instead of like an accessory to my husband's image. That became my inspiration. I wanted to design elegant, affordable pieces for women who had forgotten their own beauty while trying to fit into someone else's world. I didn't know much about fashion production or branding, but I knew how to learn. I watched tutorials, attended free online seminars, and read late into the night. I found small suppliers who believed in my vision and agreed to start small. I poured my heart into every design. The first samples arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I remember holding the fabric in my hands, running my fingers over the seams. It felt real, like a piece of my soul had taken form. I named the brand Revel, short for revelation, because that's what it was, a revelation of who I could become when I stopped being afraid. I launched my first collection online with nothing but a simple website and a social media page. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. It was mine alone. The first week, I sold 3 pieces, then 5, then 10. Each sale felt like a heartbeat. When Charles found me checking orders one night, he raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I started a small business," I replied. He laughed. "A business? Jean, you don't even know how to manage your own calendar. Don't waste your time." I looked at him calmly and said, "It's not a waste if it belongs to me." He didn't argue. He didn't have to. His silence told me everything. He didn't take me seriously, and that was fine, because soon he would. That night, as he slept beside me, I watched him, the man who had built his power by keeping me small. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I knew that one day he would wake up and realize that the woman he thought couldn't survive without him had already built a life he could never control. Every empire starts with belief, and that night, mine began to rise. I woke up the next morning to a silence that felt almost ceremonial. My heart wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, calm, focused. I walked to the mirror and studied my reflection. For years, I had seen myself through Michael's eyes, small, dependent, invisible. But that morning, I saw someone else entirely. A woman who had survived betrayal, humiliation, and loss and still had enough left in her to rebuild everything from the ground up. I whispered to my reflection, "You were never weak. You were just made to believe you were." I began my day with a notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "Empire Plan." It sounded bold, maybe even absurd, but I needed something bigger than revenge. I wanted meaning. I wanted to prove that I could create something from nothing, not for Michael, not even to silence his arrogance, but for myself. I started with what I knew: interior design. I had an eye for beauty, balance, and emotion in spaces. I began offering consultation services from my living room, using my social media to showcase old photos of houses I had decorated. At first, no one noticed. The silence was discouraging, but I refused to give up. I reached out to local cafes, small boutiques, and struggling businesses, offering to redesign their spaces for minimal cost, just enough to get my name out there. A cafe owner named Lily took a chance on me. Her place was falling apart: dim lights, cracked tiles, dull walls. I spent 2 weeks transforming it into a cozy, modern sanctuary filled with light and warmth. When she reopened, customers flooded in. People took photos, tagged the cafe, and soon my name started circulating. Designed by Jean. That one phrase became my signature. Within 2 months, I had 5 clients. By the 4th month, I had hired 2 assistants. It was exhausting but exhilarating. Every corner I painted, every flower I placed, every lamp I adjusted felt like a declaration of independence. Then came the call that changed everything. A real estate developer wanted me to design the interiors for a new luxury housing project. It was my first major contract, worth more than what I had seen in years of marriage. I remember sitting in my small office, staring at the number on the contract, and crying, not because of the money, but because I finally felt seen. I didn't stop there. I expanded. I launched an online course for women who wanted to start their own design businesses. The tagline read, "You don't need permission to rise." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of women joined, sharing their stories, their dreams, their fears. I wasn't just building an empire. I was building a movement. But as my name grew, so did the whispers. I began hearing Michael's name again. He had heard of my success. Someone told me he was struggling. His company had lost investors. His new relationship was falling apart. And the arrogance that once defined him was cracking under pressure. The thought of it didn't bring me joy. It brought me peace. Because I finally understood my victory wasn't in watching him fall. My victory was in standing tall, unshaken, without needing to look back. One evening, I was invited to an awards gala recognizing female entrepreneurs. I wore a gold gown, my hair styled the way I liked, not the way Michael used to prefer. As I walked onto that stage, The lights felt warm on my face. I looked out at the crowd, hundreds of people clapping, cheering in for a moment. My eyes burned. That night, I realized that the empire I had built wasn't made of marble or money. It was built of moments when I refused to break, and deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Success has a strange way of bringing ghosts back to life. Just when I thought my past had settled quietly behind me, it came knocking again, wearing a familiar suit, speaking with the same confidence that once crushed me. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was preparing for a meeting with a luxury brand that wanted me to design their new flagship store when my assistant walked in looking pale. "Jean, there's someone here to see you," she whispered. "He says it's important." I didn't expect to see him again, not like this. Michael stood in the doorway of my office, the same man who once told me I was nothing without him. But time had carved deep lines into his once perfect face. His arrogance had faded into something closer to desperation. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with memories neither of us wanted to touch. "Jean," he said finally, forcing a small smile, "you look incredible." "Thank you," I replied coolly. "What brings you here?" He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes scanning the room, the sleek furniture, the awards on the wall, the team working just beyond the glass partition. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I have," I said, "against all odds." He chuckled softly, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "I won't lie, didn't see this coming. You, building a business, running a team, you always said you weren't interested in the corporate world." "I wasn't," I said, leaning back in my chair, "until I had to be," nodded, avoiding my gaze. "Jean, I'm not here to fight. Things haven't been great for me. The company, it's struggling. Some investors pulled out, and, well, I made some bad decisions." I waited, saying nothing. He sighed. "I guess what I'm saying is, I could use your help, maybe a collaboration. You've got influence now, and I could use that." There it was. The man who once said I couldn't live without him was now asking me for help. "Michael," I said quietly, "do you remember the night you told me I'd never make it on my own?" He looked away. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. "No," I said, "you meant every word, and I'm glad you did, because those words became the fire that built this." I gestured around the office. "Everything you see here was built from the ashes of your doubt." He stared at me, speechless. For the first time, I saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't angry anymore. He was lost. "I didn't come to fight," he said again, his voice trembling. "I just thought maybe we could start over. Maybe we could." I raised a hand to stop him. "You can't rebuild something you destroyed on purpose. You didn't just leave me, Michael. You broke me down so I'd never stand again. But I did, and now, you want to share the view from the top." The air between us turned sharp. He took a step back, shame flickering across his face. "You've changed," he said bitterly. "No," I corrected. "I finally became who I was meant to be." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "You're right. Maybe I deserve this." He started to walk away, then turned back. "But just so you know, Jean, you're colder now. Success made you hard." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Michael, you made me hard. Success just showed me I could survive it." He left without another word. I watched him go, feeling a mixture of sorrow and relief. That chapter of my life was closing for good, not because I wanted revenge, but because I no longer needed closure. That night, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights, I felt something deeper than triumph, freedom, the kind that comes when you finally stop needing someone who wants to find your worth. But fate wasn't done with us yet, because the next day, a scandal broke in the news. Michael's company was under investigation, and his name was everywhere. And somehow, through all the noise, his eyes still found me again. Through all the noise, his eyes still found me again. The morning news painted his downfall like a spectacle. "Former CEO, under investigation for financial misconduct." The headline read, Michael's face plastered across every major channel. The same confident smirk that once ruled boardrooms now looked hollow, defeated. I watched in silence from my office window as my assistant scrolled through the articles. "Jean, it's everywhere," she said softly. "People are saying he might lose everything." For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Vindication, relief, maybe even pity. The man who once held my future in his hands was now watching his own collapse in front of millions. But instead of joy, I felt something more complicated, like the ghost of the woman I used to be was whispering, "Don't celebrate his fall. You've already won by walking away." Still, the world had a cruel sense of irony. That same day, My company's largest client called. They were backing out of a contract worth millions because of their past affiliation with Michael's firm. His destruction was spilling into my world, tainting everything it touched. I gathered my team in the conference room, the tension in the air thick. "We're not going down with him," I said firmly. "We've built this company on integrity, and that's how we'll stay standing." One of my senior partners hesitated. "But Gene, the media is already linking us to him. Investors are nervous. They're questioning whether we can survive the blow." I looked at their anxious faces, the same faces that had believed in me when no one else did. "Let them question," I said. "We don't answer with words. We answer with work." Over the next few weeks, chaos tested every ounce of my strength. Clients pulled out, deals froze, whispers spread like wildfire. I worked day and night, personally calling investors, restructuring projects, and ensuring no one in my company paid for a sin they didn't commit. And just when things started to stabilize, I got a message from an unknown number. It was Michael. "Gene, I need to talk, please." I ignored it. The next day, another message arrived. "They're taking everything, Gene. The house, the cars, even the company. I have nowhere to go." For a second, I stared at the screen, remembering the man who once told me I'd be nothing without him. Now he was the one asking for mercy. That night, I sat alone in my office, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. My heart battled between compassion and justice. The part of me that had once loved him wanted to help, but the woman who rebuilt her life from his betrayal whispered, "He made his choices. You made yours." 2 days later, I found myself at the courthouse. I didn't plan to see him, but fate had other ideas. Michael was there, sitting on the steps, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. When he saw me, he stood quickly, shame flickering across his face. "Gene," he murmured, "I didn't think you'd come." "I'm not here for you," I said. "I'm here because one of your ex-employees is suing me for something your company did. So yes, I'm here for damage control." He nodded slowly. "Of course, always the strong one." He hesitated, then added, "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I have to ask, do you ever regret leaving me?" I looked him straight in the eye. "Every day," I said quietly. His expression softened, but before he could speak, I continued, "Every day I regret wasting so many years believing I needed you." The words hit him like a storm. His shoulders sagged as if the weight of his own choices had finally crushed him. "Michael," I said, my tone steady, "I'm not here to hurt you, but I can't save you either. You taught me that no one can rescue you from a life you built on lies." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I guess I finally understand what I did to you." "I hope you do," I replied, "because now you get to rebuild if you choose to, just like I did." I walked away before he could answer, my heels echoing across the marble floor. For the first time in years, I felt a strange peace wash over me, not because I had one, but because I no longer needed to. That night, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. My phone buzzed again, another message from him. I didn't open it. Instead, I deleted the number. Closure doesn't come when they apologize. It comes when you finally stop needing them to. But as my company rose again from the chaos, I had no idea that the world would soon test me in ways even deeper than betrayal and revenge. Because sometimes, strength invites storms you never saw coming. There's a kind of silence that follows survival. It isn't peaceful, it's heavy, like the pause between thunder and lightning. For months, I thought I had finally outrun the storm. My company had recovered, my team was thriving again, and every magazine seemed to call me the woman who rose from ruin. But success, I learned, has a cruel appetite, always wants more. It started subtly, a missed call here, a postponed meeting there. My calendar filled so quickly I barely saw the people who mattered. My best friend Anna called one night. "Gene, you sound tired. When was the last time you did something just for you?" I laughed it off. "I'll rest after this next launch." She sighed. "That's what you said last time." She was right, but admitting that meant facing something scarier than failure. I had built an empire out of ashes, but the higher I climbed, the fewer people I found beside me. Then came the blow I never expected. It was a Thursday evening when my assistant rushed into my office, eyes wide. "Gene, it's your mother. She's in the hospital." The room spun. I dropped everything, literally everything, and drove straight there. The antiseptic smell, the faint beeping of monitors, it all felt too familiar. I hadn't seen my mother in months. We'd grown distant since I started the company. She said I'd changed. Maybe I had. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile under the thin white sheets. Her eyes fluttered open when she heard my voice. "Jean," she whispered, reaching for my hand. "You look tired." I smiled weakly. "You always noticed that." She chuckled softly. Then her face turned serious. "All these years, I prayed you'd build something of your own, but not at the cost of yourself." The words sank deep. I'd spent years proving I could live without Michael, without anyone, but in doing so, I'd forgotten how to live with people. That night, I sat by her bedside, replaying every choice I'd made. I thought success would fill the emptiness his betrayal left behind. Instead, it just changed its shape. When she was discharged a week later, I took her home and stayed for a few days. For the first time in years, I cooked, laughed, and felt human again. She told me stories from her youth, how she'd once dreamed of running a small bakery but never got the chance. "You always were my second chance," she said, smiling. "You did what I couldn't." But then her tone shifted. "Jean, you built everything out of strength. Now it's time to learn to build out of love." Those words lingered long after I left her house. I returned to my office and looked around at everything I had built, polished, perfect, unfeeling. My empire looked magnificent, but my heart felt empty. One evening, I stayed late, alone with my thoughts, when a knock sounded at the door. It was Anna, holding 2 cups of coffee, and that same gentle look that used to anchor me. "I figured you'd still be here," she said, handing me a cup. "So, what's next, queen of everything?" I laughed. "I don't know. For the first time in a long while, I don't know." She smiled. "Maybe that's the best thing you've said all year." We talked for hours about life, mistakes, the weight of ambition, and for the first time, I let the walls around me crack. I told her about Michael's downfall, about how it didn't feel like victory, and about how my mother's illness made me question everything I was chasing. Anna listened quietly. Then she said something that pierced straight through me. "Jean, you didn't build an empire to prove him wrong. You built it to prove you were enough. But you were enough long before any of this." That night, when I finally walked out of the office, I looked up at the city skyline and realized how easily we confused power with peace. In the days that followed, I began to slow down, not because I was tired, but because I finally understood that survival isn't the same as living. Then, one morning, I received a letter, handwritten, old-fashioned, and unsigned. Inside was a single sentence. "You taught me strength. Now teach me forgiveness." The handwriting was unmistakable. "Michael." I stared at the words, unsure whether to feel anger, pity, or something in between. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, because if I truly wanted freedom, I had one final battle left, to fight not against him, but within myself. The letter stayed on my desk for 3 days before I touched it again. Every time I glanced at it, memories stirred like dust in sunlight. His laughter, his betrayal, the long nights I cried alone, and the long years I spent building a life without him. Forgiveness was a word I had locked away, afraid that opening it might let the pain back in. But that letter, short, fragile, human, felt like a door waiting to be opened. On the 4th day, I wrote back, "Meet me where it all began." That place was the old cafe on Luth Street, the one where he first told me about his dreams and where I once believed I was part of them. I arrived early, the smell of roasted coffee beans and rain-soaked pavement wrapping around me. My hands trembled slightly as I stirred my drink, not out of fear but because I didn't know what forgiveness was supposed to feel like. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The sharp suit was gone. His posture had softened. He looked human. "Jean," he said gently, almost uncertain. I nodded toward the seat across from me. "Michael?" I nodded toward the seat across from me. "Michael?" For a while, we just sat there, 2 people who once shared everything, now struggling to share even silence. Finally, he spoke. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I wasn't sure either," I replied. He gave a faint smile. "You look stronger." "I am," I said simply. He took a breath. "I owe you an apology for all of it, for tearing you down, for making you believe you were small. I've spent years trying to rebuild what I destroyed, and I can't. Not without saying this to your face." I studied him carefully. There was no arrogance left, no pretense of control, just a man trying to find peace in the ruins of his own choices. "I don't need your apology to heal," I said. "I already did that on my own, but I do need to understand something. Why? Why break someone who loved you?" He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "Because I was afraid. You had something I didn't. Heart. I thought if I controlled you, maybe I could own that light too, but I only dimmed it. His honesty stung more than his cruelty ever had. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Then I said softly, "You were right about one thing back then. I couldn't live without you, not until I learned how." He nodded slowly. "And now you've built everything I never could." "No," I said. "I built what you couldn't destroy." Tears slipped down his face, and for the first time, I didn't see him as my enemy, just a man who'd lost his way. He reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope toward me. "These are shares of what's left of my company. I want you to have them. You deserve it." I pushed it back. "I don't want your empire, Michael. I already have mine. Keep it, and build something better this time. Not for power, for peace." He smiled faintly through his tears. "You always were stronger than me." I shook my head. "No, I just finally believed it." We talked for hours, not as lovers rekindling a past, but as two souls acknowledging a storm that had finally passed. By the time we walked out of the cafe, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. As we reached the corner, he turned to me. "Jean, one last thing. Do you forgive me?" I took a deep breath. "I forgive the man you were, but I don't forget the lesson you taught me." He nodded, eyes filled with gratitude. "That's more than I deserve." We parted ways without promises, without longing, just peace. That night, as I drove home, I passed by my office building. Its windows shimmered like a mirror of everything I'd built: resilience, strength, and for the first time, I didn't feel pride or triumph. I felt gratitude. I had survived love, loss, and ambition. I had learned to build not from anger, but from healing. And in that moment, I understood something my mother once told me. Power isn't in proving them wrong, it's in not needing to anymore. But destiny wasn't finished with me yet, because sometimes, when you finally close one story, another begins, one that asks not what you've built, but what you're willing to give. Months passed after that final meeting with Michael. Life, for the first time, felt still. My empire ran itself with loyal hands and wise minds. I didn't need to chase anything anymore. The world that once demanded my attention now moved around me. Not because I commanded it, but because I finally understood how to let it. One morning, I walked through my company's glass doors and felt something shift. The energy that once pulsed with urgency now felt steady, calm. I looked around at my team, people who had grown alongside me, who had believed in me when everything was falling apart. For years, I'd called this place my empire, but standing there, I realized it wasn't made of walls, profits, or headlines. It was built from the people who stayed when I had nothing left. That realization sparked something new in me. I called an emergency meeting, not the kind that caused panic, but curiosity. Everyone gathered, unsure what was coming next. "I've been thinking," I began, standing before them. "We've built something incredible, but I don't want this company to just be a success story. I want it to mean something." They listened, eyes focused. "I know what it feels like to start from nothing, to be told you're not enough. So we're going to change that narrative for others. From this quarter forward, 10% of our profits will fund small businesses run by women who were told they couldn't." A ripple of surprise filled the room, then applause. Some eyes glistened with tears. My heart swelled. This was what power was meant for: not revenge, not validation, but transformation. Later that day, as I reviewed the plan with my board, my phone buzzed. A message from Anna. "Your mother's asking when her CEO daughter will come to dinner without her laptop." I smiled, shut the screen, and for the first time in years, left the office before sunset. That evening, I sat at my mother's table, surrounded by laughter, the scent of warm bread, and the kind of peace you can't buy. My mother looked at me, her eyes soft but knowing. "You've finally found it, haven't you?" she asked. "Found what?" I smiled. "What all that work was really for," she said. "You weren't building an empire, you were building yourself." Her words landed gently, like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve for years. As the weeks turned into months, our initiative began changing lives. I met women who reminded me of myself: scared, determined, underestimated. Each one carried a story of resilience, and each time I helped one of them rise, I felt a part of me heal. One day, during an event for new entrepreneurs, a young woman approached me. "You're Jean," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I watched your story online. I started my business because of you." I smiled and shook her hand. "Then promise me something," I said. "When you make it and you will help another woman do the same." She nodded, eyes bright with tears. That moment became the true crown on everything I had built. That night, I stood by my window again, the city lights stretching endlessly across the horizon. But this time, they didn't represent power. They represented connection, millions of lives, each fighting, dreaming, becoming. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who stood trembling in the ruins of her marriage, told she couldn't survive without a man. She had no idea that her pain would become her blueprint, that every heartbreak, every sleepless night, every failure would carve the foundation of something greater than survival. It was never about proving Michael wrong. It was about proving myself right. I raised a glass to the city below and whispered softly, "Here's to the empire I built, not from wealth, but from worth." And in that moment, I knew my story wasn't about revenge or victory. It was about evolution. Because when a woman rises after being broken, she doesn't just rebuild, she redefines what power means. My name is Jean. Once, I was told I couldn't live without him. But I learned something far more powerful. I didn't need to live without anyone. I just needed to learn how to live for myself. And that is how I built my empire. And that is how I built my empire.